bit of housekeeping before we do the roll call. Item number 3 will be deferred to be heard in the Criminal Justice Committee. So, Anita, whenever you're ready.
Roll call. Councilmember Morrell.
Here.
Councilmember Giarrusso. Councilmember Harris. Here. Councilmember King. And Councilmember Green. Here. Present. We have a quorum.
Thank you. First up, we have the minutes for our March 13th, 2024 meeting. Mr. Green Ms. Harris moves, Mr. Green seconds. All in favor, vote aye. There you go. Never mind, we're going fast today. All right. Minutes are approved. Next up, after the message on item number 3, number 4, we have appointments. The first up, we have the Fairgrounds Citizen Committee. I'm sorry, to correct that, 3 is not deferred, 11 is deferred. Sorry, which is the same item, it's just on a different agenda. So we have appointments. The first up is the Fairgrounds Citizen Advisory Committee. We have Maple Gaines. She has a waiver timely. Mr. Green.
I submit the name of Maple Gaines, who is a resident of the community, the Fairgrounds community, and I know her to be motivated to work with the City of New Orleans, so I respectfully submit her name for appointment to the Fairgrounds Citizen Advisory Committee. We have her paperwork properly filled out, as well as a waiver that's been timely received. I will move to forward her favorably. Seconded by Councilmember Harris. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. Miss Maple Gaines will be forwarded to the full council favorably. Okay, next up, we have B, which is the Sandy Krasnoff New Orleans Criminal Justice Council. First up, we have Mr. Troy Glover. Members of the council, I respectfully submit the name of Mr. Troy Glover for appointment to the Sandy Krasnoff New Orleans Criminal Justice Council. That agency involves many agencies within criminal justice and also support meeting to discuss and to coordinate their activities. Mr. Glover has shown his interest in working with formerly incarcerated and also in working within the criminal justice system to enhance it. So I respectfully submit his nomination. All right, Mr. Glover, the same question asked everybody. Why do you want to be on this committee?
The council plays a key role in promoting public safety and reentry issues across the city.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
He's present. We have a completed application properly submitted. Mr. Green moves. Ms. Harris seconds. Please vote your machines.
Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, Mr. Glover, for being here. He will be submitted favorably to the full council. Next up, we have Mr. Raynard Sanders. Raynard Sanders. All right, we will temporarily pass over to see is he coming today? Okay, we will temporarily pass over and see if he gets here before the end of the meeting. Next up, we have Melissa Sawyer. We have a waiver that's been timely received. Melissa Sawyer works with the Youth Empowerment Project. She is an advocate in the community, and she is especially an advocate for young people to try and avoid their introduction to the criminal justice system. I'll move for approval. Seconded by Mr. Green. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. She'll be submitted to the full council for approval. Next up, we have Mr. Derek Martin. Go on down, Mr. Martin. I ask you the same question I ask everybody. Why do you want to be on the Industrial Development Board?
Well, I moved to New Orleans to help champion economic development 12 years ago. And since being here, I've served on as many boards as I could to be effective in leading and being part of leadership. So the opportunity came up and I gladly accepted it.
All right. We appreciate you offering yourself for service, Mr. Martin. You have a completed form properly submitted. We have a motion. All right. Mr. Green moves. Ms. Harris seconds. All in favor, vote. Aye. 3 yeas, no nays. You'll be submitted for approval to full council. Thank you, Mr. Martin.
Thank you.
I appreciate your attendance. Next up, we have the Board of Liquidation and Debt. We have Ms. Amy Fields. Hello, Ms. Fields. Why would you like to be on the Board of Liquidation and City Debt?
As a born and raised New Orleanian, I love to serve for the community and extend my expertise past SUNO students and families. I've had over 17 years of finance experience, so I look forward to serving.
God bless you. We have a form fully submitted. I will move for approval. Second by Mr. Green. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. You'll be submitted for the full council for approval. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for your
appreciate
interest.
it. Last up, we have a completed waiver timely filed for Mr. Flozell Daniels for the RTA. Mr. Daniels has previously served on the RTA. As you know, that is a agency that is in transition. Mr. Green moves favorably. I will second. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. Mr. Daniels will be moved favorably to the full council.
Mr. Chair.
Barring Mr. Raynard Sanders, who hasn't appeared yet, these are all going to go on consent, correct? They're not?
No, we're too late for consent.
Okay, never mind.
But they will be heard individually
Okay, thank
on
you.
the regular agenda.
All right, so next up, we have the confirmation hearing for Mr. Howard Trey Nobles. Did I hear it? All right, we'll go to the next item on the agenda. Number 6. All right, going back to number 3. Number 3, which, due to some miscommunication, number 3, which deals with the contract between the city and Disability Rights Center, is going forward today. Mr. Schwartz will be presenting.
Good morning, council members. Thank you all for giving us an opportunity to present on what we feel is a really exciting initiative. And I'll give some comments here in the hopes that there's, I think 2 other agenda items that will be coming up today. And hopefully this will provide background for all of them. As many of you know, the City Council approved about $5 million of ARPA funding last year, working primarily with the Department of Health, but also many other departments, including our own, supporting public health, public safety, and community economic development initiatives. In that process, $5 million was allocated to support economic mobility. At the end of 2023, the Office of Economic Development team, Courtney Stuckwish-Wong is here, the Deputy Director of the office, really led the charge on this. And developed a program called Economic Mobility in Motion, Moving New Orleanians Forward. We implemented a really robust process that received 52 proposals for the $5 million. We had $40 million of asks for that $5 million, which just shows the need that exists in the community in this space. And we ultimately selected 10 recipients that will serve nearly 3,500 individuals through their programs over the next 3 years. As you all know, ARPA funds have to be allocated this year and expended by the end of 2026. So as a process of moving these subrecipient agreements forward with the awardees, almost all of which are multi-year agreements that need to comply with ARPA and other guidelines, we're here today to present the first 3 to the City Council. The first is the Disability Rights of Louisiana will receive $300,000 for their Financial Access, Inclusion, and Resources Program, also known as the FAIR Program, which is the Gulf Coast sole reentry and financial coaching initiative specifically tailored to formerly incarcerated people with disabilities. So we're incredibly excited about that work, reaching clearly a population of need in our city that we frequently don't have the resources to invest in. So we're very excited to be here today. There are 2 others. I'll save those for those agenda items. That is the Disability Rights of Louisiana before you all. We're obviously happy to answer any questions you all have today and in the future about any of these programs. But that's the Disability Rights of Louisiana motion.
Well, first of all, Mr. Chairman, as a sponsoring author of the Money for the Fair program, this need has been there forever. So I just want to thank Mr. Schwartz and the administration. And really, it's a blessing that we have the ARPA funds. There's reentry in Louisiana We always hear the data about we lead the nation in incarceration. But what we don't hear is that because since everyone doesn't get a life sentence, we also lead the nation in the amount of people that return home. And the data shows that many return home with disabilities. They paid their debt to society. They have an affliction or disability that affects them in terms of their reentry. And these funds will go a long way in supporting them since they're coming home. Let's make that entry, that landing a little easier and a little better with financial and some literacy support. So thank you for finally making sure we catch up with what has been a long-standing problem in our state and our city. Thank you.
Thank you. Truly our pleasure.
All right, with that, I will move to report this favorably. Can I get a second? Thomas. Second by Councilmember Harris. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. Reported favorably. Mr. Schwartz, do you have other items on our agenda?
There are two others.
Why don't we just do those in a row?
Absolutely. So the other two, I'll go over them briefly. The other two motions before the committee today. The first is Louisiana Green Corps will receive, or is proposed to receive $415,000 for its Construction and Conservation Corps program, which trains young people in high-growth jobs in the green construction, water management, and solar industries. These are obviously priority industries for our city. LA Green Corps is one of several organizations doing really incredible work training young people who are frequently overlooked in various systems, and so we're very excited to make a strategic investment in that work. And then the third motion before the committee today is for the Rooted School, which will receive $1 million. This was one of the, I believe, 2 maximum awards that we gave. Rooted School will receive $1 million for a guaranteed income program that will be a part of actually a longitudinal study, so creating some really amazing data, working with 800 public high school students to receive $50 a week for 40 weeks over the life of the program, with an aim to improve a whole host of metrics, including academic performance, college enrollment, employment prospects, and financial literacy. So we're really excited to see this work. There's a lot of exciting literature in the universal basic income space, and we feel like the Rooted Schools proposal was really innovative in that regard. And just a side note, some of the work that we're proposing investing in here is actually getting the interest of some major national and international foundations. We actually have a meeting later today to speak to some foundations who are very interested in this work, investing in economic mobility in the city. So very excited to present these to the council.
All right, first we will take up a motion on the first item, M24-130, which deals with Green Corp. I will move approval. Second by Councilmember Green. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. That will be reported favorably. And next up, motion 24-138. That is the Rooted School. Councilman Harris moves favorably. I have seconded. Please vote your machines. 3 yeas, no nays. Reported favorably. Thank you, Mr. Schwartz.
Thank you, council members.
Next, we will go back to Mr. Nobles. Come on down. All right. We're now on item number 5, which is the confirmation hearings for Mr. Howard Trey Nobles as the Director of Property Management. So, Mr. Nobles, since this is a little bit more robust confirmation hearing, can you give us some of the background kind of on yourself and how you ended up in this position?
Sure. Prior to my work at the city, I used to work for GOSAP, turning around doing disaster reimbursements. Had a successful career there, and the city decided to poach me so that I did not have to drive 98 miles to Baton Rouge every day, and started working for Ms. Hassan in the PDU. Did disaster recovery in the PDU since 2015. Through all the different storms we have, and been active in operations in the EOC. So I'm used to turning around and dealing with a lot of problems when the situation isn't good. So Director Threat here asked me to turn around and come take a look at our property management department when the past director was resigning. So got into the position, have been there since January working. and trying to assess all the issues that we have and correct them the proper way.
Well, I can say from just my staff, from our own personal experience, you have been tremendously responsive. And one thing I know that we really appreciate is that when you have a problem that requires multiple steps to reach a conclusion, you not only lay out what the multiple steps are, you update us on each milestone to get towards the conclusion, which for many people, whether it be DPW or whether it be property management, as long as you are getting constant communication that there's movement towards resolution, people have a lot of patience. And I really appreciate that you've kind of tackled this, and I think a disaster background is probably appropriate, but you've tackled it as a series of very large problems that you have to kind of take apart piece by piece to reach that resolution. Councilmember Harris.
Yeah, I echo that, Trey. You know, we have done multiple tours, joke that we were doing building tours like we used to do roadwork tours, and we've seen atrocious conditions in the 6th district with rats and mold and all kinds of craziness. The 2nd district, we figured out how to turn on the lights just in one visit. And I just...
They did work.
I know, they do work. They just didn't know how to turn them on. So I really do appreciate the problem solving that you're bringing to this position and the willingness to work and really get on the ground and get your hands dirty. I know you did a lot of work in the low barrier shelter to try to get that back on track, and so I'm just really appreciative of you. And again, your just willingness to work with the offices to make sure that our constituents, our service people are getting adequate facilities that they need. Now, I do have some questions for you,
Okay.
Specifically about our procurement process and how that helps or hinders the repairs that we need to make to our buildings and to our facilities.
Under this current public bid law, we run into some issues. There's a sort of question as to what constitutes just maintenance and what constitutes a public work. I will say, and I apologize for being a little late today, we had a Super Bowl meeting prior to this, and actually one of the reasons was I was actually talking with the state about possible changes to procurement in order to speed things up. So I have a good working relationship with the director of purchasing. We spend a lot of times during hurricanes side by side getting everything accomplished. When I need help and can get to him, I get that help. But there are certain statutory requirements that turn around and slow things down, and I'm trying to work with the state to possibly figure out ways to expedite some of that. But it is a process, and it always does take time, and as it should, just to make sure that public dollars are spent properly.
No, I appreciate that. I appreciate you working with the state. Hopefully you'll work with myself, and I know Councilmember Giarrusso. We're very concerned about the city procurement process and the processes that delay things happening within the city. Mr. Montano, as you know, this has been a big concern as well, Mr. Threat. So hopefully you will continue to work collaboratively with us to ensure that we can get procurement back on track and speedier than it currently is. We do have a dashboard now of all city-owned property. Who is responsible for keeping that dashboard up?
So currently, we have a dashboard that property management is managing. We have a contractor from Civics currently in place who is continuing to identify all city facilities. And we recently just entered into contract negotiations for the city's new asset management system, and we got a good one. So once we turn around, get through contracting and get through the initial installation phase, we will have all of our buildings, including all of their basic equipment, all mapped with inside the asset management system, along with it has trackers built into it that do allow for basically the lifespan. So as we turn around and do our regular maintenance, the clock that is set to it turns around and moves at a regular pace. If we as a city start missing our maintenance, that clock speeds up. If we don't turn around, if we are making repairs and multiple repairs, it starts to alert us that I need to come and ask for money to replace it sooner. So we made a good choice. We didn't, you know, it was the best option out of all of them, and it provides both for us and for DPW a vital asset for moving forward into the future.
Yeah, and I know we have city-owned property that literally are lots that sometimes become
We're finding them.
unmaintained, to put it nicely. If we could make sure that those are tracked and maintained or put back into commerce so that we can make some money off of the sale of those properties, or even
Lease.
long-term ground lease.
Forestry.
I think NORA has a great framework for redevelopment of those properties, and it's something that the city should look to and get those properties back into commerce. I know I have several in my district, and I will be leaning on you to make sure that we get those back into commerce. The final question I have is one that concerns the cemeteries. Do we have a new director of cemeteries yet?
I have someone that I have currently using in that position. She is actually a PDU employee. She's from our historic preservation team, Miss Jessica Strawn. She is currently taking it on that role that Emily previously had. I haven't moved her there officially at this point. I really want to see how she does first.
Okay.
But she has that historic preservation background to really understand the value of our cemeteries, the concern and care to take care of them in the proper manner. So she seemed like an obvious choice. You know, the cemetery side, I still have some of the staff that handles sort of the mortuary aspects of it, but we're moving her along slowly. I haven't really announced that yet.
Yeah, and Councilmember Harris, I'd like, if I could, I'd like to come talk to you about cemeteries. We've got some decisions as a city administration to make. I mean, when we talk about Hope and some of the looking at a new cemetery.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think the proper place might be for quality of life discussion with the public and yourself. So that's something in probably next week or the week after I'd like to sit down and talk to you about cemeteries.
Yeah, me too, because I just had a conversation about Lafayette number 1, which is closed to the public. It is a tourist attraction. I know that we've met with the tomb owners who are willing to have it open in some fashion.
I have as well.
To the public. At the same time, I know that there are business owners around it, like T. Martin, Tony Gelderman, who are eager to even form a nonprofit to take care of the cemetery. So I think that's something that we should be exploring as a city to kind of take that off of our hands and allow them to help with maintaining and opening and closing the cemetery.
We do currently have some capital projects that are routing right now to turn around and repair the roadways on the inside.
Yep.
Once, I believe that's got to get done by about by the end of the week. We'll have that, and then there is a small concern regarding some of the trees inside that we're working through that issue before we either issue the NTP to move ahead or issue a small change order to try to adjust the work to account for them if possible. But that work will be ongoing. We're also looking at putting some additional security, similar to what the crime cameras are that we have, but to make sure that we don't go back to the days where we had all of that vandalism,
Yep.
whether purposeful or just by neglect of, well, not necessarily neglect, by the unconscious actions of visitors damaging the property that actually belongs to those tomb owners. So there's some plans that were set up. We're looking at sort of trying to finalize and nail down those once we get the capital portion complete.
And I would be remiss if I didn't mention Lafayette number 2, which is just on down the road in my neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And that is in deplorable state as well. And so the conditions of all of our cemeteries really need to have a hard look to determine what we can do to preserve them. If we need a nonprofit set up so that, like a Friends of the Cemeteries, like Metairie has?
I think there's some discussion because there's parts that we'll be able to, when we do reopen Lafayette 1, and if we do find a way to generate revenue from that, that would go into that cemetery fund, then we have the ability to increase the maintenance of those cemeteries. But there is the whole point that the tombs are owned by other than the city.
Right.
And so that is sort of where we may want a Save Our Cemetery or other organization to look at how they could work hand in hand with the tomb owners to repair that private property.
Yep. I appreciate you. Thank you, Chair.
Before we get to Mr. Green, just as a follow-up on the cemetery issue, I know that a member of my staff, Monet Brignac, has been, as much as we don't maintain the city-owned cemeteries, we also have situations like Hope Haven where we have a variety of people buried in a city-owned or managed cemetery where we don't even know where the bodies are. And I bring that up because a member of my staff has been working, Rest Haven, I believe, is the one that she's been working with. We're still trying to find the body of one of the victims of the upstairs lounge fire because that property was so mismanaged by a contractor the city chose that we don't even know on the site where the person's buried. And whatever institutions that we create going forward to deal with city managed property, especially where people's remains are interned, it has to be a process and a mechanism that is sustainable and that will not allow for similar circumstances to happen. I think between our various cyber attacks and the like, if we're not treating those sort of records with tremendous redundancy, I would hate for us to be in a position as we transition to more of a digital footprint that if we are beginning to log and create documentation as to where people are buried and where they're at, that we don't run into a situation where we have a cyber attack in the future at some point without duplication and redundancy of records, and we have to tell a family, well, you found your person, they were in a pauper's grave, and now we don't know where it is again.
So the records for the cemeteries are, for the most part, kept in fireproof file cabinets.
Okay.
But they all are extremely old. So one of the things that I have already been looking through is working to digitize said records, not to remove the originals, but so that there is easier access to them and less chance of having a record fall apart due to being overhandled. In essence, I'm going to treat said records as assets in our asset management system once they can be digitized, so that we can literally pinpoint down to grave spots and try to attach the records onto those spots in the new asset management system. That would allow us to easily get to all of said documents, look through, have a digital map. I know, and we do have, the city does have some redundancies, but ITI would be better to speak to about our current state of protections. But I do want to try to digitize, then we can preserve the original ones in a better manner for long-term safety. And that would allow us to hopefully open a door to what we can by going through the, I want to say, 40-plus extra large fireproof file cabinets worth of documents going back years. We also took one of the logs for Holt, which had been damaged already. I guess it had gotten wet and moldy at some point. I currently have that at a preservationist, trying to both digitize that book and restore it back to as good as they can make it.
Okay. Mr. Green.
Thank you for your willingness to serve in this position, certainly at this challenging time. I could have actually withdrawn my request to speak because Councilmember Harris brought it up, but I just want to emphasize to you one of the, and it wasn't about the cemeteries, but one of the challenges that I have sometimes is that I think that we're doing a good job in code enforcement. We're doing some demolitions. We're making some neighborhoods quality of life enhanced because we're taking down residential properties, privately owned properties. one of the challenges that I get when I go to neighborhood association meetings is they say, well, what about the city's property? It's a challenge that you have, and I will just leave it at that. What about the city's property is something that people do think about. That's all. I appreciate your willingness to serve.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The board is clear. What's the pleasure of the committee? Ms. Harris moves. Mr. Green seconds to approve Mr. Nobles. Ready? 4 yeas, no nays. You'll be forwarded to full council for confirmation with a motion for approval. Thank you.
May I ask, Mr. Chair, a procedural question? When would the appointment be effective?
He's already serving in an interim capacity, so it would just be a continuation of his. The moment he's fully confirmed, he just would continue doing the job he's already been doing since January. So.
Yeah, and if I could, Councilman Morrell, like I say, I've worked with, got full faith and confidence in Trey. Worked with him even when I was FEMA director at GOSEP. I had a chance to work with a very detailed individual, you know, committed to accomplishment of the mission, and you know, I think he'll do a good job for us in the city of New Orleans and the residents.
Okay. Thank you. But it'll be up on Thursday, correct, Anita?
Tomorrow.
Yeah.
Right.
All right. Thank you. We will go back in the agenda to Mr. Raynard Sanders so we can get you in and out of here. Mr. Sanders is up for the Sandy Krasnoff New Orleans Criminal Justice Council. Same question we give everybody, Mr. Sanders. Why do you want to be on the Sandy Krasnoff Criminal Justice Council?
Well, it kind of fits into my life work. I'm a long-time retired educator and have always been interested in solving problems on the front end rather than the back end. And I think this is an opportunity for me to affect that, particularly as it relates to criminal justice reform and the makeup and the opportunities for many young people that are abruptly ended because they make some bad mistakes on the front end.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders. What's the pleasure of the committee? Mr. Green moves, Mr. King seconds. 4 yeas, no nays. You are moved to full council for confirmation. Thank you, Ms. Sanders, for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right. Next item on the agenda. We are going to go to item number 7, which deals with the request for professional services agreement between the council and Transcendent Law Group to conduct a confidential investigation involving office supervised by the Ethics Review Board. This is a request from the Board of Ethics. We have all been briefed in some regard on this. I will move to approve this motion. Second by Mr. King. Please vote your machines. 4 yeas, no nays. It will be forwarded to the full council for approval. Next up, we have an item for discussion, but not for voting. This is a bit of an interesting item. It is not being voted on today because we have an amendment that has to be introduced before Thursday's vote at the full council. Essentially, at the state level, there was a passage of a constitutional amendment to provide additional homestead exemption opportunities for first responders. However, in kind of a unique, weird situation, the council must also separately pass an ordinance to require that the Department of Finance and assessor actually allow first responders to utilize something that was passed in the state at a constitutional level. So it is kind of rote procedure. It's not something that the council has a tremendous amount of authority or really choice in doing, but it's a procedural requirement for first responders to have access to this benefit, which was granted at the legislature and at the state level. I think there's one comment, Anita?
Yes. This is from Laura Russell. She says, please grant first responders the tax exemption added to their homestead exemption. I have lived in Orleans Parish my entire life, in my 19th year of employment. With the increase of property taxes and insurance rates lately, I constantly worry that I will have to move my family because we can no longer afford to live in Orleans Parish. This would affect my spouse's commute, but most importantly, my 4 children will have a different life. Please allow first responders this opportunity. The extra exemption would encourage employees to remain parish citizens and help with recruitment for future first responders. That's it for the.
All right, thank you. With that, wait, we're not voting, so with that, that concludes our conversation on that item. Next up, let's take up number 6 before we go to our final matter. Number 6 establishes the rules for City Council regarding legal representation, disclosure of certain privileged documents, and the ability to make corresponding amendments to existing Rule 28. So basically, this just creates our own internal policy regarding how we're going to deal with confidentiality with our in-house counsel. Councilmember Harris.
I just want to add my name to it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. I don't see any questions. I'll move to report it favorably with Ms. Harris's name added.
Yep.
Second by Councilmember Green. Please vote your machines. 4 yeas, no nays. It is passed. Last item on the agenda, we have a discussion of department safety and personnel matters. We have Mr. Montano and Mr. Mulligan who will be up here presenting. Also, for the record, as I said previously, number 11 has been deferred to the Criminal Justice Committee. All right.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Gilbert Montano, CAO, Tom Mulligan, Deputy CAO, here to discuss a proposed nascent reorganizational opportunity that we see as effective and efficient for the particular agency of safety and permits and an overall encompassment of what we feel can be an opportunity for one of the most important front-facing agencies within city government. We've always highlighted and articulated this particular agency should be writing checks for the city. This is the economic development engine in so many ways and so many pieces. I believe you all probably get the same phone calls we get about the challenges of permitting, the time it takes, the delays, and all the other issues. We understand and appreciate that things can't always just be the same. So what Tom will highlight is a lot of his team's work and recommendations to better effectively organize and manage the Department of Safety and Permits and the plans associated with that. So with that, I will turn the major pieces of the conversation over to Tom, who has worked both with his internal team and external teams to better edify the end goal for the Department of Safety and Permits and OBIS at large.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, Vice President Morell, other members of the committee. I did receive your correspondence, Councilmember Morell, which I did my best to reply to in writing, so I believe I've addressed some of the concerns which you've raised in that correspondence. Happy to answer any direct questions. The short of it is, first off, the thing I want to say right out front is that the problems which exist within safety and permits are in overwhelming part not due to any individual employee. They've existed for years. They've existed in some cases for decades, but we're committed to fixing them. Transformative change in any bureaucracy, especially a municipal government, can be difficult. It can be unsettling for some people. But I think there is broad agreement that there's room for improvement within DSP. I'm satisfied with the validation which I've received both internally and externally from a consultant whom we've hired, that that's the case. And we have a good sense of how to proceed. This is one effort, as Mr. Montano mentioned, in its early stages. It's been appropriately socialized with civil service that we intend to pursue. There will be others. And I certainly understand how change can be difficult. There's going to be external stakeholders who maybe have been able to exploit inefficiencies that have existed to this point, who will be upset by change. But that's not going to deter us. We think it's important, and I know that the leadership of safety and permits, as well as my staff and myself, are committed to effecting transformative change when it makes sense and when it's clearly needed, and that's our intention here.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start with a couple of questions. I was in receipt of your email, and I think I also sent you another response, but I think we should start with a real basic issue, which is we are a city that operates off of a civil service model. And I guess the question becomes, when you are a government that operates off a civil service model, there are inherent obstacles and understandings in sidestepping the civil service model. And the first question I have, which is really kind of a basic one, is in the definition of chief zoning official, which is the person who is having their responsibilities changed, it says under civil service, this position would serve as the primary assistant to the director for all matters relative to the application, administration of the city's comprehensive zoning ordinances, short-term rental licensing program, administrative adjudication, and enforcement of non-construction related portions of the city code that fall under safety and permits. That's pretty clear that this position encompasses short-term rentals as well. And, I mean, there are other people up here who can brush me up on civil service. The whole purpose of civil service is to not promote this idea of flipping out positions that are established and have existing responsibilities to individuals who are unclassified. So how do we get past this first step?
Well, I think that's precisely the point. The question is not, the question is, does the classification make sense operationally? We don't write classifications to suit individual employees. We ensure that classifications reflect the importance of the work done. And so that's why we go to civil service immediately and did so in this case. We say, all right, internally, does this make sense? Are responsibilities appropriately assigned? Does one employee have too much work? One employee have too little? Have circumstances changed over time, maybe in the legal landscape, the regulatory landscape? What lessons have we learned? And then should changes be made to job descriptions as a result?
Let me ask you an even more basic question. Did civil service approve what you're doing?
Civil service is looking into it right now, and I would add, we expect
let's stop there. So you asked for forgiveness, not permission.
No changes have been effected yet. And we expect all employees.
So there's no person currently unclassified who has taken a portion of responsibilities from the chief zoning official and spun them off. That's what you're saying today, right now.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Is there an individual who is unclassified who is currently overseeing the short-term rental regulation portion of the office?
Well, some unclassified employees, for example, Tammy Jackson has a role to play. But no responsibilities have been changed and will be changed until we receive approval from civil service. I expect all employees to do the jobs which they've been assigned, that includes the chief zoning official, until an official decision will be made by civil service and others, in which case it will be communicated through the standard channels.
So your representation today is things are currently status quo?
Things are currently status quo. I spoke to the DSP leadership this morning about this issue.
That's great. So that's issue number one. Issue number two, and I think where, from my perspective, I've only been here 2 years. Actually, I think all of us have only been here 2 years. So we don't have necessarily the perspective of the council members who've been here for multiple years. But there has been a tremendous amount of controversy surrounding short-term rental enforcement. It has been a tremendous problem almost from its inception, that when short-term rentals were legalized under the previous administration, to be clear, under the previous administration, from its get-go, there was both an effort, from my opinion, speaking to former council members and from public perception, that because there was a lot of revenue to be generated because of the city's portion of the hotel-motel tax, that there was an effort to try and legalize short-term rentals without looking at regulation simultaneously. And from our perspective, now speaking as someone in the last 2 years, even when we came into office, there was no regulation of short-term rentals. And I guess the challenge, which I think it would be helpful for the administration to speak to today, is the individual who currently is over short-term rentals was part of a small group of people in our first year here in 2022 that worked with us after this is pre you getting that in this role you currently have, Mr. Mulligan, but we had to essentially freeze the budget of safety and permits to force there to be a short-term rental office that was properly staffed. I mean, it's one of the awful but necessary instances of the council doing surgery with a sledgehammer, because that's all we had available to us. And I think part of the response we've gotten from people, both internally and externally, primarily externally as well, is that when you have someone who kind of stepped into the breach, who's been the forward-facing person, both when we started having robust short-term rental enforcement and up to and through our legal challenges and ultimate win there, that shifting from someone who has shown repeatedly they're willing to do the right thing in a civil service model to an unclassified person gives a tremendous amount of trepidation. Because unclassified people, I know it's a preference for a lot of people in a non-civil service environment to have more at-will employees, but from my perspective, there are a lot of times, especially at the highest levels, where civil service works because you have less fear of your adherence to policy leading to your termination. So I guess my question is, one, why do you think an unclassified person is the best person suited for that position, if you think it should be an unclassified person? And two, how are you prepared to argue that person will be insulated from the whims of people inside and outside of government who may have a rationale for not having robust short-term rental enforcement?
So the first question is, and I did mention this in my letter, there is no desire to pursue an unclassified person in the way you described. What there was identification of a problem and brainstorming about the best way to solve it. And one idea, which we had and discussed, was creating an unclassified role, requesting an unclassified position within safety and permits to handle the legislative policy development, legal issues attendant to a number of programs, including short-term rentals. Now that was discussed because we want to get the perspective of internal stakeholders. I'm not going to get a particular personnel issue, but it was fully discussed with employees, and it was rejected, in part because it wasn't something they wanted to pursue. And so that's it. That's not the way it's going to be. We have a classified employee, Celeste Sparks, who runs short-term rentals. She'll continue to run short-term rentals. And just on the previous point, I of course understand the vexed legal history with short-term rental and the difficulties that have arisen there. But I do think, and this is something that struck me in your letter yesterday, Vice President Morell, I do think it's a mistake to conceptualize short-term rentals as a purely or mostly legal program. At this point, we have a stable regulatory regime, it seems, and this is an operational program. I need enforcement. I need to make sure that that program is fully staffed. I need to make sure that we have oversight that is not primarily concerned with the legal aspects. We have a law department, but is really pushing to make sure we have strong enforcement and adjudications. And so that's the intention.
So, Mr. Mulligan, I actually disagree with you. I can tell you that the person who is currently occupying the chief zoning official position, who has a law degree, as I understand it,
yes,
has had to step in several times to interpret the short-term rental laws and regime in order to provide guidance to other people in the short-term rental office on what to do. And it was, and I can show you the email thread, back and forth with, I guess, the person who's over short-term rental enforcement, of not getting a response that satisfied the legal requirements. It required the chief zoning official, who has a law degree, to interpret that for us to get resolution. So I disagree with you absolutely that we don't need someone to interpret these laws, especially since the laws are going to continually evolve. We have commercial short-term rentals coming up from CPC, and that study to be done, and then implementation. So again, I can't see how someone who doesn't have a law degree, and I don't know if they do or don't, who is now over short-term rentals, I think we need someone who can interpret those laws in order to enforce those. And quite frankly, I'm looking at the history of the position for chief zoning official, and in the March 19th, 2018, and this is before any of us were here, Civil Service Commission meeting minutes, Robert Hageman, who's still at Civil Service, said the new rental licensing program was one of the reasons for the creation of this position, and that meant the STRs. He also said that the position, quote, requires a law license to facilitate responses to these issues. Anytime we have a zoning issue around short-term rentals, the issue of the legality of the short-term rentals comes into place. So again, I'm sitting here disagreeing with you adamantly that you need a lawyer involved in the administration of the short-term rental program.
Well, Councilmember Harris, I don't disagree with you. We need a lawyer involved, and as we mentioned in our letter, the chief zoning official will continue to weigh in on matters affecting zoning insofar as they're relevant to the STR program. I just want to stress the only change that is being made, that is being proposed to be made, is who does the short-term rental program manager report to? Does Celeste Sparks, the short-term rental program manager, report to the chief zoning official, who is also responsible under the current system for zoning proper, which needs a lot of attention, that's very clear. ABOs, special events, an adjudication program, that's already, well, it's had some problems, and I mentioned how we've solved those problems, and other issues? Or do we want to have Celeste Sparks, the program manager, have direct access to DSP leadership so that operational and administrative issues can be addressed right away? In my judgment, it's the latter.
Well, I think a question, and this is a significant question, so my staff's brought to my attention a number of emails between ourselves and the current chief zoning officer where we have been told as recently as April 5th on special event matters, short-term rental matters, that they are no longer the person to be reached out to on those matters and no longer have responsibilities for those areas. That's a problem, Mr. Mulligan, because you just told us that until civil service makes its determination, it's status quo. That's not status quo.
Well, that's not, but I would remind all city employees that they are responsible for doing the jobs that have been assigned to them until they receive official guidance from civil service and their supervisors otherwise. I don't know who sent you those emails. I don't know what their personal stake is in any of this, but until we have official approval.
We've been in direct contact with the chief zoning officer, person we're discussing, and that person has responded that they have been told that they do not have responsibility of those areas anymore, and they refer us to new people. That tells us, from our perspective, if there's a person that we have been dealing with on these issues consistently, and now they're telling us we have to talk to someone else, that is a change in the status quo. And if the responsibilities, and I mean just to get belt suspenders on what Councilman Harris previously said, in November 28th of 2017, when this position was created, it talks about the qualifications and what they intend to oversee. It requires a law degree. Further, as we've given pay increases to that position, part of the consideration was short-term rental enforcement. I guess the question is this, and I guess this is a fundamental issue, and I think it's something Gilbert's going to have to weigh in on. I appreciate that sometimes it feels like government is working on a plane in midair, that adjustments need to be made, and from a perspective of being from a lot of times out of frustration, you see something that could work and you really want to do that. But the reality is that when we have a civil service environment, there are steps that have to be taken before changes can happen. And more importantly, and I think what you're hearing from the council as a whole is that when there is substantial change, when there is the effort to make substantial change that is going to impact the ability for council members to communicate with their constituency, because make no mistake, we get more short-term rental complaints than you do.
Yep.
When you're changing things, and A, you don't inform the council you're doing it, B, they're substantive, and the people that council members rely upon who have shown time and time again that they treat matters of short-term rentals with urgency, professionalism, and expertise, and we find out that there's a substantial change without any justification to us beforehand or any consultation with us beforehand, I hesitate to remind you this has happened before, Gilbert, and you see what we do. And if there is a change in safety and permits that we disagree with fundamentally, one, you know what we will do, and two, it really bothers me on a fundamental level, and it was in my first email, that we're even having a conversation of changes at this level and creating uncertainty in front of an event which will have the largest proliferation of illegal short-term rentals probably for the year in Jazz Fest. The fact that we are even talking about there being uncertainty over who is managing the short-term rental department, who is going to be responsive to Mr. King and Ms. Harris when every illegal short-term rental in their districts pops up overnight and they're looking for immediate efforts to shut them down, I will tell you the current chief zoning officer does it. If I call her, she immediately responds with staff and deals with it appropriately and quickly. When we're now communicating with this person, they're going, I've been told to step back and you have to communicate with someone else. The question is, who's going to own responsibility when efforts that were done to build public support? The public, for the first time in history, thinks we're actually enforcing short-term rental laws. When that doesn't happen, are you going to own that? If this entire plan, this entire idea falls flat on its face because A, the regulations regarding civil service are not adhered to, or the uncertainty at the topmost level leads to there being loopholes that people exploit throughout the city for the madcap period that will be the next 3 weeks of Jazz Fest, who's going to own that and the repercussions of it?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, if I can just take 2 steps back and I'll address your question directly. I want to start, I know Mr. Mulligan, his team, and the efforts associated with this, the premise of this was to make things better. And that's always where the origin starts, whether it's DPW, whether it's procurement, whether it's NOPD, or any other agency. The idea is how can we adjust and create a better and more effective form of government. And typically and often, the organizational delineations and accountability is where you start. Who owns what? How do they incorporate and execute, and who can you have time to, and who has the time and efforts and skill sets to deliver on whatever function in those individual agencies. The task at hand relative to the organizational recommendations that Mr. Mulligan and his team have made and discussed were under that premise. How do we make things better? How do we make the enforcement of short-term rentals more effective, more efficient, and all the other pieces? I can speak at least from a heartfelt perspective. I know the intentions were pure, and I know the intentions, at least from the representation from their leadership, how do we make this organization better than it's currently running? Now, as you go through that process, and I think Mr. Mulligan has referenced, it's very nascent. We don't even have a final report from the external agency that was brought in to better evaluate through community efforts to determine the outcome. We do not have the validation or the support to have this plan completely blessed by the civil service. We are still in the conversation stage and the organization stage, and I believe that the feedback that we're hearing is heard. We are not tone deaf to the importance of STRs and STR regulations. I've lived through, as you know, and have had a significant amount of, it's a major issue for the public in the city of New Orleans at every level, at every meeting. So I assure you, there's no tone deaf. We would never in a million years approve or in any way want to take a step back from what has been accomplished through the organization, the frankly investment in the STR program at the state level, the local level, and all the like. I think that as far as the proposal that is being addressed, if it's not working and if it doesn't get approved, we have to certainly readjust. I think that the feedback and the criticisms and the concerns are heard, and I think that the team can evaluate and better evaluate and determine what is the best solution. The thing that I would always caution our teams to always do is we don't want to start something that we think is going to be effective with an uphill battle. That's unnecessary. I would much rather everybody be on the same page, helping each other support the initiatives that we're trying to accomplish. So without being too verbose in my response, I think I'll just re-highlight the origin and the premise of the reorganization discussion was from leadership's perspective in the best interest of what they do every day. In no way and in no account would they ever want to take a step back from what things are being done in a good and positive and effective way, whether that's responsiveness, whether that is more effective policy interpretation and the like. Those goals and those requirements will never leave the task table of the leadership within the organization. Now, the how we get there is probably what we're currently discussing now. I think we can at least all agree that there is significant room for improvement on all our agencies across the board, and as leaders and managers, we should always be looking for what that form of improvement can become so that we don't become stagnant as an organization. And I think that is exactly what we're talking about here. When Mr. Mulligan proposed the reorganization to the team and the efforts, there was no names in the boxes. It was just programs. And that's usually the way an organization would look at things. I'm hearing very differently that sometimes maybe names have a history associated with this. We'll have to reevaluate and determine what is the best.
Not to interrupt you, it's not just that names have a history. These job titles have explicit civil service responsibilities. Whether you love or hate a civil service system, you literally, and Amy's not here, she'll probably walk over here, you cannot take responsibilities that are granted to a person under civil service and arbitrarily give them to someone else. You have to go through civil service first. And honestly, I think two things kind of strike me here. One is, I would argue one of the biggest groups that utilizes and interacts with safety and permits, other than individuals on a variety of different levels, are the district council members. The district council members are the ones who get inundated with all of the complaints, particularly with short-term rentals. Any discussion, even with a management company or a group you've hired on how to improve short-term rentals, without including the district council members who are anecdotally being inundated every day with short-term rental problems, if you want to find out how to improve the program, you should be talking to them, as well as, the staff in the office and the occasional people who are applying for short-term rental permits. I think that fundamentally the process, because it lacks certain perspectives, is flawed. But going back to my earlier point, you can't just say, I don't want to, when the chief zoning officer's rules or responsibilities of that position are explicit.
And you can ask, Councilmember Morell, and that's all we've done. In the same way that job description says the chief zoning official has to be able to stand on the scaffolding, it may not make sense anymore if it ever did. And that's all we've done. We haven't changed people's job responsibilities. We have asked for a more efficient customer service and more aggressively focused enforcement job description. Whether civil service blesses it or not is their decision to make, but that's what we're requesting.
And I stipulate with everything you just highlighted as far as what we can and cannot do as far as the classification organization. Now, to your point, we may not always agree that those classifications make any sense whatsoever. But I think
that part, I don't think we disagree that one can request of civil service a reorganizational model and go through that deliberative process. There's two things I would add. One, if you're fundamentally changing an office that directly works with different agencies and groups, I don't know, like district council members, you might want to include them in the conversation of how can we improve the office. Because the thing is, I'll tell you, I've dealt with consultants my whole life. Consultants do the path of least resistance. If it's easier to bill their hours talking to staff and talking to the people who walk in the office, that's what they'll do. But if you're not including all the parties that are affected by such a monumental change, the actual premise might be flawed as far as how you would reallocate those responsibilities. Because short-term rentals is just such, we both know that winning the lawsuit will not be the end of this. We will be fighting with these platforms for the foreseeable future until they are brought to heel. I hesitate to use that term because Jeff Landry uses it way too much, but we have to make these platforms understand that we have a robust enforcement program and that we are going to do things much more aggressively, because until we do, and the challenge we have, and I appreciate the candor which we're all talking today about this issue, is that there needs to be more communication and transparency with a change of this magnitude. Absolutely. Even if it's just a request. Even if it's just a request, it would be important to get the feedback of the district council board to say, well, what other responsibilities do you want to shift around? What does that restructuring look like? Because your consultant may come back with a plan that a council member can say, some of the stuff is not workable in the day-to-day operations of my interaction with the short-term rental management department.
And once again, I agree with what you're highlighting, Council Member. One of the, I think, the core goals that I heard from the leadership team when the onset of this proposal happened just a few weeks ago was the reporting structure. And I'll tell you why that's important and why there's I felt a distinction between the outcome and output and the enforcement tools and mechanisms, what you see now as a deliverable from the STR office as opposed to what is a restructure for organization. If someone has too many direct reports, they are very, very challenged, and I've experienced this across the board, who often the busiest and most executing and effective people get saddled with so many different items that they manage everything, and unfortunately, not to their detriment, there is something that is lost in that shuffle. Now, whereas if you equally distribute in some form or fashion the proper amount of workload and reporting structures, who you're accountable to and who you account to, there can be an efficiency in that, not changing the goals and the outcomes of that particular program. So I'll use any particular deputy CAO in the role. I can't put everything under Joe Threat. I can't put everything under John Thomas, everything under Tom Mulligan, because at some point there will be a break and a give in something. As I understand and appreciate the goal of the organizational structure, it wasn't about changing any of the enforcement mechanisms, the outcome, the output, or the deliverables, the responsiveness of the sort. It is just, how can we flatten the organization so that 3 people aren't just managing everything, so that we can hold more people accountable. Now, I understand that communication could have been better as it's clearly being articulated to Tom and myself now, moving forward, but I think I don't want to sacrifice what I understand the goals to have been as opposed to maybe what the perception may have caused.
Well, and I think, to your point, I think when you're talking about restructuring something like the CAO's office, you're dealing with a combination of classified and unclassified employees. And I think that there is some inherent flexibility at that top-heavy model when you're dealing with appointees versus classified employees, where if you want to do a restructuring, there's a lot of flexibility there. When you're trying to restructure departments, in particular, for example, this being extremely basic for Councilmember Druso who's not here, inevitably we're talking about potentially creating new positions, which changes the budget fundamentally of departments. The fact that there hasn't been kind of an ongoing effort to be in communication with the council on what a restructuring looks like, beyond the fact functionally there'll be changes, but there could be a budgetary tail to the way that department's restructured, it is critically important to get that input on the front end versus the back end. Because right now I can tell you, based on this conversation, and I'm not trying to at this point talk about any nefarious undertones. I'm really talking at this point kind of a unintentional disregard, I'll call it that, of the other users of these various departments and systems, because as you know, for better or worse, the council members, especially the district council members, are the one-stop shop before one-stop shop. And when you fundamentally change an office and people call and ask the council member, how do I resolve this situation? And they're reaching out to heads of departments who are going, well, actually, that's all been changed now. That is jarring, because then they have to communicate back to the individual or business who's making that request. I have no idea what's going on at this point. And that's problematic, not just for us dealing with the repercussion of disappointing a constituent, but it makes government look silly when we can't explain to everyone clearly what's going on.
Well, if I could just address that, Councilmember Morell. Of course, we want to have your perspective. I hope we have shown in the other departments, which I oversee, our willingness to engage with you. We want to hear your opinions. It is valuable. We also need to have space in which to brainstorm, to operate, to think about ways to improve things, to consult civil service, to consult budget. And as I say, nothing has been executed. We had some internal conversations. They culminated on the 3rd of April. On the 4th of April, we engaged civil service, and on the 5th of April, we received communication from you, pretty strong communication, I have to be frank, not accurate communication about the underlying motives here when we are trying to improve things in good faith. And so I would hope moving forward, we just think about the right tempo and the right way in which to engage you. If you want to be involved at that initial stage where we're trying to socialize this with employees, I think we could do it that way. If you want us to bring you concrete proposals, this is what we can do, this is what is going to be a problem from the point of view of civil service, we could do that too. But I do want to stress how important your perspective is and how much we want to work in good faith with council, like we did with code enforcement.
Well, and to be candid, based upon the information that my office received, based upon the information that, for example, the individual who was being looked at to assume this role was an unclassified employee, I would argue that everything in my letter was correct based upon the information that I had, because I had no direct communication from you or anyone in safety and permits about the changes. I will still say, had you consulted with the council, the first thing I would have said is, I wouldn't have even spoken to civil service until May or June regarding short-term rentals, because after Jazz Fest, it's a barren wasteland as far as short-term rentals and how they'll operate in the city of New Orleans. As you know, once the heat sets in, everything here slows to a crawl. Gilbert, you know, because our revenue falls off a cliff when the summer months hit. If we're talking about fundamentally changing or entertaining changing a department that has such a tremendous interaction with our tourism partners, our hotels, our residents as they experience the influx of people into the city, what this has become is a tremendous distraction. And I think had we had some basic level of communication, delaying this conversation until May or June probably would have averted a lot of, well, first off, increased communication would have averted a lot of the heartburn that we all have today. But more importantly, we just won a tremendous victory at the federal level about our ability to enforce short-term rentals. And that should not be understated. Our city attorneys did a tremendous yeoman's job of ultimately winning that case. It will now go from a tremendous federal lawsuit to the death by 1,000 cuts of every single illegal short-term rental operator and every platform trying to undermine us at every single corner. We need to all be lockstep in this venture going forward. I think a big telltale takeaway from the day is there needs to be constant communication with the council, especially regarding the departments we interact with on a daily basis. And I mean, you know which those are: safety and permits, code enforcement, these departments we deal with on a daily basis. If there is going to be a fundamental change or even a conversation of one, we're not asking you come to us for a blessing. You should come to us for input and keep us aware of what's going on, because if you want to prevent a game of telephone, don't let a game of telephone start. Just reach out to the council and go, here are some ideas we're looking at changing, just as a heads up, and maybe get that feedback on the front end. I mean, this city is big, but it's also small. And I would argue, based upon the facts that I had and I have currently, a lot of the concerns that I have, I mean, I appreciate that certainly you've addressed a lot of the intent conversations that I put out there based upon us conversation now. But at the time, based upon the information I had, it was very jarring and very suspect, particularly the timing. Now, I appreciate the timing's coincidental, but for those of us who deal with the deluge of short-term rental complaints, this is literally the largest time of the year when all of our offices are flooded with people renting out every shed they have in their backyard to jazz festers. So it's just so important that as we get those complaints, I don't want my staff, I don't want Leslie or Eugene's staff, because I mean, let's be honest, the fairgrounds is all Eugene's people. They're the ones that are going to start getting people going, hey, I want to shut down this guy who's running out a fraternity party in his shed in his backyard with a pool he dug yesterday. If he contacts the chief zoning officer, who then goes, well, I don't know what to tell you, that's not my, there's confusion as to what my role is, that doesn't help Eugene, but it also doesn't help the administration or the city because it creates that uncertainty. So I appreciate the air is cleared somewhat today. I appreciate we all kind of understand what our responsibilities are to each other going forward, but constant communication is not a bad thing. Asking for our input, like I said, we're not those who craft the departments. That is the administration that does that with the insight and acquiesce of civil service, but our input is valuable, and whatever you do, Tom, we're gonna have to pay for it. So talking to us beforehand would behoove everyone. So I think that we all understand what expectations are from each other going forward, and we certainly want to be very engaged on whatever you're doing with the short-term rental office, because we're going to have to communicate that to everyone who calls our offices about it. So, is anyone else, anything? Oh, sorry, Councilman Harris.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate this. And Tom, you know, we work closely together and well together. But we, as district council members, are the customer service arm of the city. I know y'all don't think that, but I read every single email. Matt reads every single email. And I can tell you short-term rentals are #1 on the list of complaints. Ongoing complaints about specific locations that have not been addressed yet, even with the opinion coming out. I can also tell you that we're getting a number of NPP requests for people who are seeking the variance on the short-term rental limitation. And that's coming before us too. And I know y'all are going to do another lottery, but again, we are the front-facing people who have to deal with people's angry calls. And I'm happy to copy you on those angry calls and emails because we get them every day, multiple times a day. And it's unfair for you to just sort of swoop in and reorganize without getting our input. And I think that's what you're hearing from Councilmember Morrell, because we are trying to help the administration. That's part of our jobs. We want the city to run well and within the laws that we as the city council pass. So if you hear me loud and clear, and I hope you do, please come sit with me and we can tell you, Matt can tell you what we're hearing, what we're seeing, because that's part of our job. But the communication has to go both ways. You need to come to us if you're going to make a critical change. Thank you.
Okay, the board is clear. We have one comment on a previous motion. Mr. Parker, you come on up. We already voted on it, but I know you were here to speak on it, so I want to make sure you're both on the record. Thank you, Mr. Mulligan. Thank you, Mr. Montano, for being here today.
How you doing? Edward Parker, 7802 Henley Street, New Orleans, Louisiana, 70126, and also the New Orleans United Front. Transparency and information on that particular motion. What is this about?
So basically thank you. There is a specific department, and there's a specific department under the purview of the Ethics Board, which the Ethics Board's attorney has determined there needs to be an outside investigation on something dealing with it. Our ability to disclose why the investigation is necessary is limited. If the investigation comes back with a report, that will be public. But as far as when there are legal, potentially even HR issues, up until the report is done, we are limited as to what we can disclose. And that is a limitation in the law. Okay. Because if the person is accused of something and they're exonerated, then you don't want to have to go and rewind that allegation proved to be false. Does that make sense? So there'll be an event. All we're authorizing is the Ethics Board asked for a group to be hired, Transcendent Law Group, to investigate an issue regarding one of the areas under their purview. If and when Transcendent Law Group comes back with that report, and that report has information that is necessary to determine further action, that report will be a public record.
All right. Is this group, are they local?
Transcendent Law Group, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. We were not in control of that RFP process. It was done at the Ethics Board.
So we have to wait until the report is done, and then there will be more sunshine on this Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And Mr. Parker, they are local. They're located on Canal Street. I just
Okay.
Googled it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, the board is clear. Councilman Harris moves we adjourn. Councilman Eugene Green seconds. All in favor say aye. Aye. It's unanimous. Thank you.